in OS.
Bubble medkit training. Oof.
Dude, it's gonna be fun.
Yeah, nice how you spell
Having
Scourge, dude.
an open tag with as many Scourges as you can. You record Tira as well?
Yeah, I asked somebody else to record, and I don't have my OBS set up to record my own voice.
Alright.
So Schway is recording.
We're gonna do the bubble trading, I guess, after the one of this elementalists, because we've actually had quite a few elementalists that were pretty outgoing and asking for the trainings. So, for anybody joining, the training is in OS.
It's next week, yeah?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Next Saturday, Polaris, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Probably be
We can
similar
figure out
time to as this one.
Yeah, whatever fits best for you, bro.
I'm just gonna wait a couple more minutes.
Wasn't Scary gonna hold it?
Just wait like 5 to 10 more minutes. Yeah, Scary, Polaris, Laser, a few guys, they wanted to do it together. Which is why we're gonna go for Scourge, for Elementalist next.
I think my shades are broken.
Your shades are
What?
broke.
How?
Yeah, my buttons.
I mean, get a new keyboard? I don't know.
No, they have like lightning bolts in them.
Yeah, because you don't have enough shade or you don't have enough life force to spam them, no?
Oh yeah, possibly.
Are you saying I'm...
No, you don't actually need life force though for the actual shades, but for F2 and 5 you need.
Yeah, you need it to F2 to F5.
Bubbles is actually right. I'm broke.
Obsidian Sanctum, guys, if you want the for the Scourge training.
I can give you some life force if you come close to me.
Oh, can I siphon this life force?
Yeah,
Give
dude.
it to Tira. Oh, keep it. Okay, now I feel alive again.
Yeah, I'll start here.
Okay.
See the first few things.
Alright,
about
we can wait a
Commander.
couple more minutes. So.
Yeah.
I don't know if more people are gonna come or not.
Just wait. Give it a few more.
How do we have 43 people in Discord? It does not look like 43 people there.
No, we have 33 in squad, and 1 outside of squad. Fucking Louis.
That is.
He said so usually half our necros run Connie and today not a single one is. Pog the training has already worked.
Connie's fucking trash. Open.
Mm-hmm.
Just saw somebody just joined. We're in OS for their training. Obsidian Sanctum, guys.
Come to the arena.
Yep.
Got some more people coming. Very good.
Yeah, that's why. Give it a bit. A lot of people come like 5 past.
I mean, I already lost all my participation.
Who cares about participation, dude?
Yeah, I gotta get participation again soon after the training.
Nice. I'll actually message a few Indara commanders. Pubbles, you wanna know what the funny thing was? After you left, we actually managed to fight the strong Indara blob.
Nice.
Pretty good meme. No, it still wasn't that hard, to be honest. But... Yeah,
if nobody wants to lead, by the way, and we actually get like confirmed that we'll have decent fights, I can lead. But then I want it like confirmed that we'll have like at least one Gandara commander to fight.
But can I drink if you lead?
Yes.
Okay, excellent.
I don't know, bro.
Why would you ask? Just
I'm
drink.
gonna ask Ceylon.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
You
No,
will-
I'm not like I'm not gonna tag up and run around the border and look for fights. Like I want like confirmed fights. If not, then I can't be asked. Then someone else can tag. Because I'm not interested in PPTing.
Alright, a few more people just joined. We're in a list, guys. If you want your invite, come in here.
You
Swissman
can join the
actually
squad, it's
tagged for
open.
them. Swissman's actually, so if we manage to get to fight Swissman, that'll be good. Best commander they have. Anyway, alright guys, we'll start with the Necro training. I hope Schway, start your recording now. As the same it has been the last few weeks, I will explain a little bit what a commander expects from the Necros to be doing in the open tag, and then after that, Tira will be giving a little bit of an in-depth explanation as to how to play the Necro, and he'll go through the traits, what traits you could be able to run, and how your abilities work exactly. All right, so I'll start with what a commander expects. There's actually 3 calls that a commander can possibly make. Every commander plays in a different style. It's all about how they would want you to play with them. Some commanders just ask for bomb, and in a situation like that, you would have to decide for yourself what to drop. But when I lead, I can't speak for all commanders. I try to ask for shade, wells, and breaches, and pretty much what I'm expecting of you when I call for shades is that you are able to drop your F5 and you can just drop an F1 shade, which Tira will explain later on the call and the damage. When I call for wells, I expect you to drop your wells, whatever wells are up. If you had to use one before or you only have one up, still use that one well that you have. If I call for breaches, you have to drop your breaches. Pretty straightforward stuff. It's not like the ref, where there's a little bit more of a different type of cooldown.
Wait, what's bridges?
Breaches are
it will
elite.
be explained. It will be explained. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Once Tira gets to it, just know there's 3 skills that commanders can call for. Some commanders don't call for them. For this, you kind of need to have your own knowledge. But after you get the skills explained a little bit more, Tira can also explain the situations when these can be used in. You just need to have a little bit more self knowledge. Besides everything I just said, guys, there's not much more to it. Tira can go ahead and explain the rest. Have fun, and after that, fucking let's blob up with a shit ton of Necros.
And get drunk. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's get started. I hope everybody that wants to learn about Necro is on Necro or on Scourge. Otherwise, go relog now quickly. First thing I want to talk about is your role in the squad. As a Revenant, for example, you are purely or mainly DPS. Your job is to do DPS. As Scourge, though, because somebody escort this guy to the arena. As a Scourge, though, your main reason is to strip enemies of boons or corrupt them. The second objective for you is DPS. So your main focus should always be corrupting the enemy, and specifically on pushes or on spike calls. So when damage is dropped, also try to corrupt the enemy. And the last thing you should be doing is providing barriers to your party. That's pretty much all of that the Scourge does. First thing first, we're going to talk about traits, because I'm assuming a lot of people don't have the correct build. There are a few trait lines that you can run, specifically the ones being Spite, Curses, Soul Reaping, and obviously Scourge. Do a swipe green, Nobia. Okay. First things first. I hope everybody has Spite, Curses, and Scourge. If you don't, please select those traits. And we'll continue in a minute. Let everyone pick trait lines.
By the way, guys, if you have questions, ask as we go. Don't be afraid to ask. That's why we hold these sessions.
Yeah, you can ask in voice or in typing. Yeah, don't play Condi's Necro. Ever. Actually, you can do while roaming, but not in squad.
That's a
not
good
big
one,
shades.
Tira. Maybe you can post a build template.
Yeah, but I also want to explain what the traits do.
Go for it.
No Soul Reaping. You can technically run Soul Reaping, but I'll talk about it in a bit. So first thing I want to talk about is Spite, which traits you can use. So from the first 3 traits you can pick, so Spiteful Talisman, Spiteful Renewal, and Bitter Chill. The bottom ones are pretty garbage. The only reasonable one is the top one, since you are going to be running with Axe and Focus. So you get a 10% damage increase, and all the skills for Axe and Focus are 20% recharge reduced. So that's pretty good. From the second 3 ones, you got Lesser Spinal Shivers or Chill of Death, Awaken the Pain, and Dread. Now, on this row, there are 2 traits that you can actually run. It's the top 2. The bottom one, Dread, is pretty garbage, in my opinion. You could technically use it, but the enemies are usually never feared, because they generally always have stab. So don't run that one. What you can run is Awaken the Pain or Chill of Death, which will cause less Spinal Shiver. The top one, Chill of Death, will give you more corrupts, but it doesn't do a lot of damage. And Awaken the Pain gives you more damage, but gives you less corrupts. So it's basically a trade-off of what you want. Do you want more damage or do you want more corrupts? And it all depends on like what the squad needs. So for general, if you have, for example, 1 ref per party, I would just take the trait, so Chill of Death. If you don't have a ref per party and you might not have enough damage, just take Awaken the Pain. From the last 3 traits, so that's either Sickness of Suffering, Close to Death, or Spiteful Spirit. You can, from these 3, you can pick the bottom 2, so Close to Death or Spiteful Spirit. And it's the same thing again as with the other traits. It's basically, do you need more damage or do you need more corrupts? If you have enough damage with either, so for example, you have a ref per party, then you can take the extra corrupts, which will make you more useful. Any questions about the spite trade line so far? What you can take or what you can't? Otherwise, going to continue to curses. Okay, let's continue to curses. Curses trade line is basically only taken because you want to, because you run Scepter. Generally, you run Scepter, and the last trait will enhance your Scepter 3 skill. But from the traits from curses, the first, can we say? I mean, technically yes, but you just use your heal skill. You don't use your heal skill to heal yourself, which I will get back to in a second. But yes, Axe, Dagger, and Scepter focus. I will talk about the weapons and stuff that you will use later in a bit. But generally, you don't run a trait because you use your Sand Flare, your heal skill. So this skill, you use it to provide barrier and not to heal yourself. So generally, the Spiteful Renewal is not really useful for you. So that's why you take the Spiteful Talisman. Yeah, okay, Punty, no problem. The Curses trade line. So the first three trades from the Curses trade line. Yeah, the Berry also removes Condies. The first 3 trades, there's only one that you can actually take. The bottom one, Chilling Darkness, Blinding Attack will also apply Chill. Is not really useful because you generally don't really blind. Insidious Disruption, the top one, Disabling a foe inflicts torment on them, is only useful for Condi Necro, but since we're not running Condi, it's gonna have to be the middle one, Plague Sending. Your first attack after entering Shroud transfers conditions. So if you enter Shroud, which is in the Scourge's case F5, you will send 2 conditions to an enemy. From the second 3 traits from curses, it's again the same thing as before. There's only one viable trait in my opinion, and it's the second one, Path of Corruption. So your F2 skill will will convert boons into conditions, so it will corrupt boons on enemies. And from the last trait, there's again only one you can actually take, is Lingering Curse. This will enhance your Scepter 3. But yeah, that's mainly the only reason why we take curses, because of the Scepter 3 changes. Okay. Next trade line is Soul Reaping. Everyone can select Soul Reaping. We'll talk about it in a second. So Soul Reaping is generally used when you run Staff. Chilling Darkness will work. Yes, it does work, but you generally don't really corrupt Fury. You can corrupt Fury, but it's not often. So it's better to, in my opinion, to go defensive and have like more condition cleanse, or actually not specifically cleanse, but more survivability. Okay, Soul Reaping trade line. The Soul Reaping trade line is mainly used for damage. Also used generally with Staff. So in the first 3 trades from Soul Reaping, there's actually, you can pretty much run all of them. But if you run Staff, you should generally use Soul Marks. They will make so that enemies cannot block your marks. The fuck, Benny? Sorry. Yeah, so If you run staff, please do run the soul marks. Otherwise, staff is pretty much useless.
Here, Tira.
Yeah.
If we take this trade that makes the marks unblockable, do we still remove the Aegis from enemies?
No, you don't. It will just hit the enemies, but they will keep their Aegis. But it can't be blocked by Aegis, so that's quite good. Yeah, the other two traits from the first two traits from Soul Reaping and Yielding Blast can technically be used, but I don't generally use them. To be honest, I don't generally use Soul Reaping either way, but to be honest, you could use either three of them. If you don't run Staff, for example, you could take one of the other two. It doesn't really matter. From the second three traits, there's pretty much one that you could actually use, specifically as Power Scourge. And that's the top one, Soul Barbs. So when you enter or exit Shroud, you can increase your damage by 10% for 10 seconds. So if you press your F5 skill, then for 10 seconds, you have a 10% damage increase. So anything that you use after your F5 will be, 10% more effective. The other two traits are, they're not great in my opinion. And for the last one, there are just one trait again, actually, Death Perception. This will give you increased critical chance and increased ferocity. But to be honest, generally you don't run Soul Reaping. But I'd like to explain what the possible traits are that you could run. Yes. When you're in Shroud, you get 300 ferocity and 33% crit chance. But generally, if you run that trait, you will be crit capped quite badly. I mean, most people do run trait, but I don't think it's the best choice. But I'll talk about that in a second. The last trait line that we run is, I generally run Spite and Curses. Yeah. I mean, personally, I don't really like Staff, and I don't think it's really any good. But it is somewhat useful in blobs because of the pressure you create with it. And some people, some commanders do actually call for marks or stuff. So if you do run Staff, instead of Axe, for example, drop the Spite trade line and take Soul Reaping. Or if you run Staff instead of Scepter Dagger, drop the Curses trade line and run Soul Reaping. Okay, so for the last trade line, the Scourge trade line. I mean, you're not
talking
gonna
about death magic.
No, death magic is garbage.
No, it's not. But okay.
Yeah, it is. You really don't need it. If you need death magic, you need some dodge training. Yes. What I'm trying to say is, if you run Staff as a replacement for Scepter or Axe, so if you replace Axe with Staff, then run Soul Reaping instead of Spite. If you run Staff instead of Scepter, run Soul Reaping instead of Curses.
So which one would be better to use? Staff with Axe? I mean, Staff and Axe focus, or Staff Scepter Dagger?
It depends on what you prefer. Generally, I would say Staff and Axe focus, but the Scepter Dagger has more AoE corrupt. So Axe focus is much more single target focus generally, except for Axe 3 obviously. But generally, with Axe focus, you can put out a lot of damage on a single target. But with Scepter Dagger, you can put out quite a bit of damage on 5 people or on multiple people. Is this Scourge build blood magic? No, blood magic is even worse than death magic. But yeah, the last trade line is Scourge, and from the first 3 trades, there are 2 trades that you could technically take, but one is considerably better than the other. So it's the top or bottom one, the trades that you can take. The middle one is only for Condi Scourge, which we don't run. So the top one will give you a barrier. Removes a condition every time you give an ally a barrier. So that is either with your heal skill or your F3. But the F skills we will get back to in a second. And the bottom one is you gain life force when you inflict burning or remove a corrupted boon. You generally remove quite a lot of boons, so you will get a lot of life force, but you shouldn't need life force. So generally you take the top one, since it's considerably better. For the second three traits, there's Desert Empowerment, which is not really any good, because if you pop your F1, you will give your allies a barrier, but generally you don't pop your F1 on yourself. Usually you use it to spike the enemy, so that one's out. The second one, Sadistic Searing, is not great, but it's better than the others. So every time you use punishment skill, so it is either your Trail of Anguish or your Elite or your Sand Flare, so your heal skill, your Elite, or this skill, then you will inflict your enemies with burning, or with your next Sand Shade, your F1 will inflict enemies with burning. Yeah, I don't. It's mainly used for the cooldown reduction. I mean, I don't think it's any great, Luis, but yeah, the cooldown reduction is nice, but the rest of it is not. And the bottom one is garbage in my opinion. Harbinger Shroud or Herald of Sorrow. The rest is next to it, true, Luis, but the Harbinger Shroud, the bottom trait, it turns your F5, it turns it into a sort of nuke with a 3.5 second cooldown. So generally you pop it and then 3.5 seconds later it goes off. But if you use that trait, yeah, it's not used in World vs. World, the trait. If you use the trait in World vs. World, you pop your F5, for example, the enemy moves away and you have no damage. And that's mainly why it's not used. For the last three traits, you have Sand Savant, which used to be meta but no longer is because they nerfed it to the ground. It's not really useful anymore. You have Demotic Lore. It's just pretty much only for Condi Necro, so we're not going to run that. And you have Feed from Corruption, which is actually really good. So every boon you corrupt will be given to you. So if you corrupt stability, you will gain stability. If you corrupt resistance, you will gain resistance. So by corrupting the enemy, you're gaining boons, which will make it easier for yourself to survive. So yeah, for Scourge, we run top, middle, bottom. Any questions so far about the traits? Or why we run specific things on Scourge right now? Okay. Let's continue to gear. So generally, because Condi will get cleansed, you will do considerably less DPS. Also, you need, in World vs. World specifically, you need spike damage to create downs. With Condi, you don't create downs. Condi is great, for example, on PvE, on our bosses or something that don't get it cleansed. But in World vs. World, it's all getting cleansed, and you need actual spike damage to create downs and to kill people. I mean, your arc DPS padding is going to get worse players if you play Condi, because power still does more damage than Condi. So, gear. Generally, you run power on Scourge. So, I would recommend going full Marauder, especially if you're a beginner. You can technically run full Berserker, but you will die in a second if you misplace or... Yeah, Clerics is not okay. You can run Berserker, but you can also run Marauder. I would recommend, especially if you're a beginner, to run full Marauder, because yeah, otherwise you're gonna die. No, you don't need Celestial gear. Yeah, 4-stat gear is always better than 3-stat because you get more stats for your money. So I would really recommend just running full Marauder, especially if you're a beginner. Even if you're not a beginner, you can just run full Marauder. It's okay. You still do a lot of DPS, and you still, well, it doesn't actually matter what gear you run for strips, but yeah. For weapons, I already talked about it a little bit, but generally you run Scepter, Dagger, and Axe Focus. So I can link them in chat, for example. As the main set, you would generally want to use Scepter, Dagger. The Scepter Dagger is actually quite strong with power. It may look like it's more of a Condi oriented like weapon set, which is also is, but it does a lot of power damage. Because if you use your Scepter 3, for example, on the enemy, if you have the Cursed Straight Line, If you use it on the enemy, you can easily crit for 5k, and that's on 5 people. You can run Bloodlust. I personally run Cruelty, but you can also run Bloodlust. I mean, I've never really run Scepter Torch, because Scepter Torch is usually more Connie oriented. And the Scepter Dagger strips more, which is what you would. Your main job is in the squad, so. Yeah, for runes, you can either go Eagle or Scholar. Yeah, also Torch stopped hitting our balls. But you can, for armor, you can run either Eagle or Scholar rune. Eagle you can run, it's easier to maintain the damage boost. And Scholar is technically more DPS, but yeah, it's gonna be needing to be above 90% health to get the extra damage, which is not always guaranteed. But yeah, you can test it out. Either one works quite well. Any questions for Gear? No? Okay.
Sorry, did you say the runes?
Yeah, Eagle or Scholar. So personally, I run Eagle, but you can also run Scholar. It's a little bit more risky though. If you can stay above 90% health, Scholar is better. Because Axe and Focus are both single target, and Scepter and Dagger are both AoE. So I will explain a bit about how you use them in a second, but yeah, I will talk about it in a bit. Sigils, yeah, I would generally run either energy or stamina on one of the weapons, and then you can run absorption, for example, on the scepter, and you can run force or bloodlust or cruelty on your axe, for example. So the scepter generally you interrupt more with, so that's why you want to run the absorption rune on that set. You can run force on the other set, so axe focus. Force gives you 5% extra damage, but you can also run bloodlust or cruelty. It generally does the same thing if you can keep the stacks up. Yeah, staff you can. I would generally say if you run staff, you could also run absorption and probably either energy or force. But that is up to you. I don't generally run staff, so. Cleanse. Nice. Yeah. Okay. So weapon skills. Yeah, I saw you running already, Ponty. Welcome back. Weapon skills. So before we engage the enemy, self-cleanse both. It's more generally a roaming thing, though. You don't need to cleanse yourself as a Scourge. You have like Tempest and Scrappers and Firebands that can cleanse way more effectively than you can. So it's a lot more efficient to run either Force or Bloodlust or Energy or... Yeah, but you rely on your party to support you. And you rely on your own barriers, but... So generally don't run Cleanse, Sigil. Yeah, Tempest Body with a Rev is okay. Or Scrapper, or at least some support. If you have some support, you should be fine. Generally, you don't have to worry about Condis, though. Because they will get cleansed so fast, it doesn't really matter. Yeah. Weapon skills. Yeah, let's get Polar. Fucking the Polaris bullying, man. Feels bad. So, for your weapon skills, before you engage the fight, I would say you would generally run with Scepter and Dagger first out. So, Axe Focus is much more oriented to pick off enemies. So before you engage the target, or the enemies rather, the enemy blob, you run with Scepter Dagger. And the main Scepter Dagger skills you should be using are Scepter 3 and Dagger 5. So these skills. These skills will corrupt wounds on the enemy. Try to corrupt the wounds on the spike. So if we spike an enemy or the commander calls for a spike or something, try to corrupt boon so that, for example, refs can do more damage if you, for example, strip protection. Or if you strip stability, then or your other people in the squad can CC them. The other skills that you can use, well, the other two, skill 2 and 4. Skill 2 actually does quite a bit of damage. It is AoE, so you can use it in between like other cooldowns. And yeah, Dagger 4, in theory, it's a great skill, but in reality, it's not. So skill 4 is you cleanse 3 conditions from yourself with 3 bounces on the enemy. But maybe more than 90% of the time, it gets either lost in the terrain or it gets blocked or reflects or it's not going to hit most of the time. So you can use it, but don't prioritize it. So skill 3 and 5 are your main priorities on Scepter Dagger. Okay. Let's move to Axe Focus. Axe Focus is much more a single target focused weapon set. So your X2 and X5, if you use both of them on one enemy, for example, you can easily 100 to 0 somebody. So even firebands, if you hit with your Focus 5 with this skill, Spinal Shivers, you can easily hit for more than 10k on squishy characters. And if you then follow up with X2, for example, so this skill, you can easily burst them down. And you'll want to do this on the more squishy people. So if you, for example, can see a Weaver on the side of the enemy blob that are in range of, just hit them with the Focus 5 or the X2, and they won't be able to deal damage to you anymore, which will help you and which will help the group. Also, you can use these skills to pick off enemies that may be slacking from the main melee ball, for example. So you can use it to pick some of them off and you can easily kill them. The next big skill for X is X3. This is an AoE skill around you, which will corrupt boons. This is a skill, yeah. Unholy Feast. Generally, you will use this when you melee engage, but we'll talk about that in a bit. This is a really good skill as well. It can easily crit for up to, I think, 4k or something. And it will corrupt boons on 5 people. So yeah, it's generally a good skill. Also cripples them, so they will be less likely to move out of the spike. Yeah, any questions so far? Otherwise, we're going to continue. No, I don't know when the matches begin. Okay. So, generally, you switch between weapons off cooldown. So you want to make sure your Scepter 3 and your X3, the main important skills, are both 10-second cooldown, and your weapon swap is 9 seconds. So generally, you want to use it either once or twice, and then swap weapons. So the 3 skill for both weapon sets you want to use the most often. Yeah, the mainly skill 2 and 4 actually. Mainly skill 4 is pretty useless, but the main important cooldowns will come in a second. I will talk about it in a second. Nice one, Luis. But generally, you want to run. You want to use like Unholy Feast or Devouring Darkness twice, and then you swap. So you swap your weapons, then you use the 3 skill, and then when it's back up, you use it again, and then swap weapon. So next up are the utility skills. So your heal skill, I said it a little bit before, your heal skill is mainly for the barrier. It's not actually to heal yourself. So the Sand Flare, this skill, you use it right before you engage the enemy, ideally. You use it to mitigate damage for your party. So if you use a Sand Flare, it will give the barrier to 5 people around you, and party priority first, of course. So people in your party will get them first if they're close enough. So the way you use this is not to heal yourself, but to provide barrier. to mitigate enemy damage. Yeah, that's pretty much all it is. It's also a Condi cleanse, but generally you don't really need it because it's just one Condi on 5 people. Next up are your wells. These are... Need one renegade for Lexine? No, you don't. Your wells are the second most important part of the Scourge, I would say. Your wells do... I wouldn't say 50% of your damage, but a lot of your damage. So placing them well is optimal, or is the best for the best DPS. The commander, or some commanders, will usually call for wells when they want them dropped. If the commander calls for wells, you drop both of your wells. So your well of suffering and the well of corruption. Don't drop them one by one. Also, if you drop your wells, try to spread them out a bit. For example, in front of me. Okay, maybe not that far apart, but if you drop them in the exact same spot on top of each other, they can easily just one dodge through them and then they're out of the damage. Yeah. Never drop wells before the commander actually calls for them, though. And also make sure if you have a microphone, for example, on Discord, if the commander is in Discord, or maybe you don't have a microphone, make sure to tell. It doesn't matter which well you drop first. You can drop either one. But if you have a microphone in Discord, please let the commander know when the wells are ready. So ideally, you want to do it on the timing of Well of Corruption. So this well has a 40-second cooldown, and the other one has a 30-second cooldown. When the first well is ready, and the other one is 10-second cooldown remaining, you can tell the commander, for example, wells in 10. And when it's 5-second remaining, wells in 5. And then when both are ready, you can say, wells are ready. And then the commander knows, okay, wells are ready, we can use them to spike him. Because if you have, for example, 10 necros with all dropping wells, you have a lot of damage, which can completely melt an enemy blob. So that's why you want to coordinate dropping wells. And yeah, again, don't drop them on the exact same spot, on top of each other. Spread them out a little bit, so they cover more area. The next skill is Trail of Anguish. Trail of Anguish is your one and only stun break. Use it as your stun break. That's pretty much all I can say about it. If you get stunned, you need to stun break, use it. If you need stability, you can technically use it for stability, but I would generally save it to save yourself. Maybe a bit selfish, but yeah, you can drop it and people behind you will get stability if you are retreating, for example. But you would ideally still use it as a stun break, because it's your only form of stun break, and without it, you're pretty much dead if you get stunned again. The next skill is Ghastly Breach. Ghastly Breach is your elite skill, but it's also a very powerful skill. So when a commander calls for breaches, that's when you drop it. The breach itself does a lot of damage and will corrupt enemy boons when they pass through it. So if, for example, the enemy pushes into you and the commander will hopefully call for breaches when you dodge back, for example, if they walk into all of the breaches all at the same time, they will pretty much immediately melt. Hopefully. Otherwise, we're doing something wrong. But if you coordinate the breaches and they actually stand in it, there's no way they can survive, because they will get all of their boons corrupted. They will get a lot of damage, and they will just melt. Any questions so far? So wells, use them when the commander calls for it. Breach, also use them when the commander calls for it, and make sure the commander knows when cooldowns are ready for those skills. So for wells and for breach. Any questions? Okay, let's continue. Next up are your shade skills. So your F1 to F5 if you haven't rebounded. The shade mechanic is unique to Scourge. So all your F2 to F5 skills will be around you unless you drop F1 first. So your F1 is a shade. If you drop the shade and then you use your F2 to F5, it will go around the shade. So if you have a shade active in the field, then your skills will go on the shade. If you don't have a shade active on the map somewhere, then the skills will go around you. So for example, if we go for a range spike, where refs will have to do all the work and you just give a little bit of barrier. You don't have to put down a shade. You can just press F3 for the barrier, and then the people around you will gain the barrier. No need to drop a shade. But if you want to spike the enemy with shade spike, then you will have to drop a shade on the enemy and then use your shade spike. But shade spike we'll get to next. So yeah, F2 to F5 skills. F5 is by far the most important and also the most damaging. The F5 skill is the shade spike, what commanders will usually call it. So when you press F5, it will pulse over 6 seconds and it will damage continually in that area. This is where a lot of your damage comes from. So when the commander calls for shade spike, you drop F1 in front, or where the commander wants a shade spike, and then F5. Yeah, I'll give you a second. So you use F1 and then F5. Wait, who the hell is running a big shade? Whose shade is this? Own up. Why you run big shade? The shade has a little bit of a cast time. It has half a second cast time. So you need to be careful not to interrupt your shade by using F5, because you can interrupt it with your F5, for example. So you need to make sure your F1 is on the ground or is cast, and then you can press F5. So when the commander calls for shade spike in 3, 2, 1, you drop the shade down on the 1, and then when he actually calls for shade spike, and then you press F5. Ideally, you want to use more shades for a spike, because every shade can hit 5 people, but you will have to split the shades out a little bit. So if you place one shade down, for example this shade here, and if you place another shade next to it, it won't hit the same targets. So ideally you need to spread them out a little bit for it to spike. But sometimes, or generally first pushes, for example, you don't really have the time to place multiple shades, because there is a cooldown between like how fast you can place the shades. If you can place more than one shade for the shade spike, by all means do it. But the more shades, the more damage. But the most important thing is actually spiking on time. So if you for example can place more shades, but you will be late, don't do it. If it just spiking on time is the most important thing. So if you can just get one shade off at the time you need to spike with shade, just drop one shade and then spike. You shouldn't feel like you need to specifically have 2 shades. It's better, but you don't specifically need it. If you can just spike with one, it's also okay. Yeah, that also works. If you can just shove a shade in front of the enemy in case they push, and then drop another one onto them when we're actually gonna spike, that also works. What's this? No, okay. So yeah, the main skill for your shades, so F2 to F5, is your F5. But the other skills are also quite useful. So F2, Nefarious Favor, rather. It will convert boons into conditions. So it will corrupt the enemy. So if you go for a small spike, for example, you can use F1 and then F2. You can also use F3 and F4, but we'll get to that in a bit. So small shades or small spikes, you generally use F2 to F4, or you use your weapon skills. It also cleanses, yeah, true. So for small spikes, you use your weapon skills or your F1 to F4. Don't use your F5. Save your F5 for shade spikes. And yeah, so the Sand Cascade, F3, it gives you a barrier. So you can use this, for example, if you don't have a shade in the field, you can use this to give yourself barrier before you push. It's 2.4k or 2.5k nearly barrier. Actually 2.4k barrier, which will block quite a bit of damage. You don't have to use it, but you can also use your heal skill for the barrier before you push, but you can. The next skill is Garish Pillar. It's F4. Or if you have it normally F4. It doesn't do a lot of damage, but it will fear the enemy. But please don't use it when we shade spike or well spike, for example. Don't try to fear the enemies out of our damage. You can use it if they are rezzing, for example, or on downs, yeah. If the enemy is rezzing, just place a shade on them and press F4. You can also use F3 and F2 probably then again, because they're lower cooldown than F5. Yeah, please don't use them on our spikes. Otherwise, you're just gonna fear the enemy out of our spikes, and we do no damage, and that's not something we want. Or staff 5. Yeah, if you run staff, don't run staff 5 on spike, or don't use staff 5 on spike. Yeah, that's it for shade skills. Any questions? So just to recap a little bit, you drop the shade spike, you drop F1, and then you drop F5, or you drop multiple F1s and then you drop F5. The commander will want to know the shade cooldown, and the cooldown that you will have to let the commander know is the F5 cooldown. So it's a 30-second. But if you can let the commander know, like, shade in 10, then he knows, okay, F5 is ready in 10 seconds, or shade in 5, then shade is ready in 5 seconds. F5 is ready in 5 seconds, rather. But also let the commander know that they are actually ready. So shade's ready, but just let the commander know shades are ready. And that he has the spike. Any questions so far?
Can you tell call wells, basically?
Sorry, what was it?
How do you call wells? Do you call them when both of them are ready, or only when one is ready, basically?
When both are
'Cause-
ready.
'cause they have- So both.
Yes. So ideally, you want to wait for the Well of Corruption to be ready, which is the longer cooldown.
Got it.
So yes, it's a bit, because you will have your Well of Suffering for like 10 seconds before you can use it, but it's
Yeah,
better
exactly.
better to spike together with both of the wells.
Because also so they are discussing in the guild, so I wanted to make it clear for them as well.
Yes. When the Well of Corruption is ready, then you say like Well's ready. Or when the Well of Suffering is ready, the well with the lesser cooldown, there's 30-second cooldown. You can also tell it commander, but you can say like one well is ready or something, and commander will usually then know is the Well Suffering.
And you also say that it doesn't matter which one you drop first, but isn't it better if you drop the corruption well first and then the suffering ones, because of the difference in cooldown, and there's also the cast time gap, basically.
But it's a quarter second cast time, so you can pretty much drop them both instantly. So realistically, it doesn't really matter which one you drop first.
There's like
But
a
yeah.
3-second difference if depending on which one you drop first.
3 second.
Yeah.
The one is 30-second cooldown, the other is 40, and both have a quarter second cast time.
Yeah, but if you drop like the Well of Suffering first and then the corruption well, you will see that when the Well of Suffering is ready, you will still have 11 seconds on the Well of Corruption, basically.
Yeah, but
But
it's
if
actually
you drop the corruption first and then the suffering, it's 8 seconds.
yeah, but it's
I'm not sure if it makes a difference or
it's
not.
10 and 1/4 second, not 11. But yeah, it doesn't really make a difference. You can cast either one first. Just make sure you drop them when the commander actually calls for them. That's the main thing. You can use either one first, because a quarter second difference is not gonna be that big, realistically, especially in blob fights. So yeah, was there somebody else that had a question? Yeah, most commanders will not instantly call for wells. Usually, though, you will, especially in blob fights, you will generally go for Shade Spike first. So that's F1 and F5. You can also use the other skills, so F2, F3, F4 with Shade Spike, and that's okay. And afterwards, the commander will usually go for wells. And as a last resort, you will drop breaches. But sometimes, it depends on the commander, but sometimes the commander will call for shades and breaches, for example, or wells and breaches, or just breaches, or you just have to listen to the commander and do what he actually says. So if the commander calls for Shade Spike, use Shade Spike. If the commander calls for Well Spike, use Wells. And if the commander calls for breaches, use breaches. Scholar or Ego Rune, yeah. And also a small tip, you'll have to sort of manage your life force a little bit. Is in block fights is less so, because generally a lot of people will be dying. You will gain life force from them. But if you need life force before a fight, for example, and you're low on life force, I don't know why, you can swap one of your wells temporarily to summon bone minions. And if you use the summon bone minion skill, you will gain 2 bone minions, and if you destroy them, you will gain life force back from them.
And blast.
Yeah, it's also a blast, but if you need life force, if you're not full life force, for example, before a fight, you can use summon bone minions, get 2 bone minions, kill them, and then yeah, you gain life force.
And blast.
Yes. You can also use the blast smoke fields, but yeah. Generally, you have much more capable classes for that. I think that's pretty much it, unless there are any more questions. On any part, it doesn't really matter. Can ask about anything. Otherwise, we're gonna go to a border, I guess.
Punty?
Ponty is muted.